Hello, Country View Cults. It's Mrs. Thomas, and I'm here to teach you about the science of reading. So, science has figured out that our brains are wired for speech, but they are not wired for reading. Our brains have to be taught how to read. Okay, it's not a natural process for us. We have to be taught all of the sounds and the words in order to be able to read. So I want you to think about that as I'm going through some of the research and the studies that I'll be talking about. So in the year 2000, the government asked the National Reading Panel to figure out how students learn how to read. What is necessary? How does a student learn how to read? So they went through thousands and thousands of research studies, and they found the main components and put them together in this reading pyramid. So I'm going to go through this reading pyramid with you. So at the bottom of the pyramid is phonemic awareness, and you might not have heard that term before. So phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and manipulate sounds. So some phonemic awareness activities might be if I said the word dog and asked you all the sounds in dog. So you go d, ah, g, right? Or I might ask you to take off the d sound and put a ol sound, and then it would become log, right? So those are some phonemic awareness activities. Phonemic awareness is taught heavily in kindergarten and first grade. At our school, we're using a program called Dr. Hegarty Phonemic Awareness. And if you want to look that up, they have a lot of videos showing you that program. It's a great program to teach phonemic awareness. Now, we've really started focusing on phonemic awareness because science is showing that phonemic awareness is the greatest indicator of a child being able to read. So if a child has great phonemic awareness, they are more likely to be great readers. Students that struggle with phonemic awareness, that is a big red flag. And it is a great red flag for dyslexia. So there's a lot of misnomers about dyslexia. It is not seeing letters backwards. That is not true. Dyslexia is a phonological processing disorder, and students that have dyslexia can be diagnosed even before they start school. They can be diagnosed when they're like 3 because it has to do with their ability to hear and manipulate sounds. Another big red flag is they have a problem with language. So they might use nouns and verbs wrong. They might flip things or say things that it just doesn't make sense. That's another red flag that they might be dyslexic. Now, we cannot diagnose students at school with that disorder. You would have to go to a neuropsychologist and have that diagnosed. But even without a diagnosis, we would still help a student that we saw was low in that area. Like how we would support the child would be the same whether they were diagnosed or not. We would start really doing heavy interventions with phonemic awareness. And we bought a program called 95% Group, and it's a great program that teaches students how to hear and manipulate sounds, because if they can't do that skill, they're unable to move up this pyramid, and they're really going to struggle in reading. So we will definitely work on phonemic awareness for students that have shown to be struggling in that area. If you would like to help your child with phonemic awareness, then I would suggest before they write a word or a spelling word, have them tell you the sounds in the word first. And if you hear them missing sounds in that word, stop and go through the sounds together. And then after you go through the sounds, go sound by sound, saying that sound and then writing it, and saying the next sound and writing it. So you're mapping the sounds to letters. So that brings us into phonics. So just like I described, phonics is taking those sounds and connecting them to print. So if I said the word hat and you went at, that's phonemic awareness. Then if you started writing at, and you wrote those letters, now you've moved into phonics. Now, there was a huge debate. There was like a reading war about whether or not to teach students phonics. And the main debate was whether or not it taught students to spell incorrectly. And so there was a lot of people against phonics. But more and more studies have come out, and they find phonics isn't just a good idea, it's essential in order to teach a child how to read, not just in English, but in all languages. You need to show students how speech correlates to print. And you've got to teach them all of the speech and print correlations. So in our language, there's 44 sounds. There's 44 sounds in our English language. And so we need to teach students all of the sounds and how those sounds connect to letters. So for example, we would teach them that IGH says I, like in high, like it's very high up. Okay. So once we've taught all of the phonics sounds and we get them to where they can decode, that means they could see H-A-T and read it hat. And once they be able to do that more frequently and fluently, then they moved up into this next piece, which is fluency. So fluency involves three things. It involves rate, which is the speed that they're reading. It involves accuracy, how well they are reading each word correctly. And it involves expression, so that they're pausing at a period and they're using emotion with exclamations. To be a fluent reader, it needs all three: rate, accuracy, expression. Okay? So I have seen some students that read really fast, but they make a lot of mistakes. Their accuracy is low. And often those students don't comprehend what they're reading. Like they'll finish really fast reading maybe 150 words a minute, and then I'll ask them to tell me about the story, and they're like, so that child is not a fluent reader. When their accuracy is that low, that's not fluency, and it really messes up their comprehension. So if you're having a child read, and I suggest that you, even in the older grades, have them read out loud to you to really know if the book they're reading is a right level for them. If they're making 5 or more mistakes on a page, and I would just kind of like count it with my hand, then that book is too difficult and their comprehension is going to be affected. So they can barely understand what's going on in that story. So I try to find another book that they're making 4 or less errors on a page, because that's probably a better fit for them. So make sure that they're reading, like I said, with the right rate. And I often tell students that they need to read like they speak, not too fast and not too slow. Like I mentioned before, our brains are wired to speak. So if they are reading like they speak, then their brains are comprehending that much better. If they're too fast or slow, it's hard for our brains to comprehend what's being read. So get them to where they're reading like they speak, with expression and pausing and all those great things. So that's the main goal with fluency. How you can help students with fluency is to sight word practice is always great if they're getting stuck on some of those sight words. Also, repeated readings are a great way to improve fluency. So, especially in the lower grades, if the book isn't very long, you could read it maybe 3 times. And the first time you read it, I'd have you read it with you, or maybe do like what I call an echo read, where you read a sentence and then they read the same sentence after you. And you do that sentence by sentence. And then after you get through the book and they kind of have an idea of what the story and the words, then you read it again, but this time you read it together at the same time. That's called choral reading. So you're reading every word together at the same time. And then the last time, I would just have them read it by themselves, and you just listen to them while they read. But that's a great way to build their confidence and to support them into that fluency piece, especially if they struggle with reading words without stopping, to build that up. Okay, the next piece of the pyramid is vocabulary. So that's understanding the meaning of words. So they might be able to understand, words that we use in conversation all the time, but when it becomes more specific, like if you're reading something in science, like about the solar system, and it's using specific terms, they might not know what those terms are. So then you're going to have to kind of help them maybe have them write down the word that they are unable to understand, and then kind of look at the sentence before and after and see if there's a way that you can kind of help them figure out that word. If you still can't figure it out by using the sentences around the word, then you might want to look it up and show them some pictures of that word and use that word in a sentence and kind of make it more in their terms and help them understand it at their level. Now, vocabulary is one of those issues where it has to do a lot with your background knowledge. So there was this really cool study that they did with two groups of students. And the one group of students had a lot of background knowledge with baseball. So they had parents that played or they played. They'd watched it on TV. They understood a lot of the terms that they use in baseball. And then they had another group that didn't have any background knowledge. They didn't watch it. They didn't play it. They didn't know a lot about baseball. Both groups could read. So they had this bottom of the pyramid. They were all fluent readers. So reading wasn't the issue. So they get both groups the exact same story about baseball. And they had both of them read it. And then they asked them some comprehension questions after. Now, to no one's surprise, the group that had background knowledge did 50% better than the group that didn't. So the group that didn't have that background knowledge, even though they could read the whole story and probably were comprehending it to a degree, there were still terms in there that they could not figure out because they didn't have that background knowledge. So the lesson to be learned from that study is that when your child is learning about a certain topic, you might want to give them more background knowledge with the topic. You might want to show them more videos about the solar system or read some more stories about the solar system and build up their background knowledge so they can understand those vocabulary words because they're going to be repeated in stories with that theme. So that's a great thing that you can do with vocabulary. The best way to build vocabulary in general is to read out loud to your child. So they have found that a picture book has the same complexity as two college students speaking, the same as their conversation. You don't think a picture book has that much complexity to it, but you'd be amazed at the multisyllable words and meaning and vocabulary words you're giving to kids when you're reading to them. So for those lower grades, even your older students, reading out loud to your child is the best way to build vocabulary. Okay, the top part of the pyramid is comprehension. So once they can decode and read those words with the right rate, accuracy, and expression, then they are beginning to comprehend the text. And that's the whole reason we read, is to understand what we're reading. But that only comes when they have the bottom parts of the pyramid. So it's the last thing to happen in reading is that comprehension piece. So I know I have read with students that could kind of do the phonics piece. They could read words and kind of decode them, but they didn't do it quick enough and they couldn't tell me anything about the story. So they really need that fluency piece in order to get that comprehension. A great way to help students with comprehension is after they read a story, have them tell you what happened in the beginning, middle, and end of the story. In the older grades, you could have them write a quick summary of what happened in their 20 minutes of reading, and that also supports them with their writing. But just having them talk out loud about the story is a great way to build comprehension. So, as I mentioned, there's been lots and lots of studies about reading, and what's cool right now is that technology is catching up to the science of reading. And there was a pediatrician named Dr. Sally Shaywitz who went to work for Yale University. And they asked her to figure out why a bunch of these kids with high IQs couldn't read. And she couldn't figure it out either. Like, why can't these students read? So she had an idea to start putting these students in an fMRI machine. And she studied their brain and was seeing what happened to their brain when they were reading. And what she found was unbelievable. So I want you to look at these two brains. This brain is an effective reader, and this brain is a student with dyslexia. And you'll see that parts of their brain are literally not activating. So both brains had the Broca's area activated. Now that's in our frontal lobe on the left side, and that helps us hear words. So like the speech sounds, just hearing the words. So both of them have that, but look how much larger it is on a person with dyslexia. So they really are relying on like just hearing those sounds and trying to hear those sounds. And then an effective reader hears those sounds, and then they take it to their parieto-temporal lobe, and that's where they start taking what they're reading, the phonics piece, and putting meaning into it. So they see the word cat, they're taking cat, thinking about maybe a cat that they've seen around their neighborhood. So they're linking the phonics piece, the speech, with the words. And then it moves into their occipitotemporal lobe. That's where they store it. So now they've seen the word cat, they know the sounds for cat, they know the meaning for cat, and they're going to store CAT in the back of their brain in the occipitotemporal lobe on the left side. And then the next time they see the word cat on the next page, they can retrieve that and read the word cat. Now I want you to notice with the student with dyslexia, are they getting meaning from those words? Are they storing them? So they don't have those major parts of their brain activated, which is why they might read and sound out cat on this side and not realize that it's cat again on the next page, because they are not storing it in the occipitotemporal lobe. So this kind of looks bad, right? But here's the good news. Dr. Sally Shaywitz found the students with this type of brain, and she took and she did heavy interventions with those students, starting at the bottom of the pyramid. She worked a lot on phonemic awareness and then moved into phonics and just slowly worked them through the pyramid. And then she put these students back into the fMRI machine after a year of intervention, and what she found was these parts of their brain began lighting up. How amazing is that? So we can rewire a student's brain and get those parts activated, which are essential in order to know how to read and retrieve words. So interventions are so important, and figuring out those students that need these interventions is essential, which is why we do the assessments that we do in order to figure out what students need in that pyramid in order to get them to be effective readers. So we want to rewire those brains so that they can read. So I mentioned before, and I'm going to end with Reading Horizons. So we use Reading Horizons at our school. There's other schools within the district and across the nation that use this program. It's a phonics-based program, and it has a very unique marking system. So this marking system makes the students stop and look at every letter, and they move left to right. They mark vowels with an X, and then they look to see what comes after the vowel, and then they mark that, and they mark the vowel sound. And you'll see for the first time, if taught correctly and taught well, a student will be able to tell you why it has a short A sound or why it has a long A sound, which was really rare for students to do prior to a program like this. Like I was always a good reader. I could say it says cat, but I didn't know why it said the short A sound. I really didn't. I just knew it said cat. So for the first time, students are able to articulate and explain why it has the short sound or why it has a long vowel sound. Another cool thing about this program is it supports science on what they found with how we read. So they have put goggles on people that track eye movements, and they were seeing, how do we read a word? Do we read it as like a whole unit, and we kind of memorize the unit and just retrieve that word cat out? We just retrieve the whole thing? Or how do we actually read? And they found that we look at every single letter when we read. We look at each letter in 250 milliseconds. It's so fast you would think that we did just read it as a whole word, but we don't. We look letter by letter when we read. So we need to train students to read that same way. So we have them move left to right and look at every single letter and look at what comes after the vowel, because it's what comes after the vowel that determines the vowel sound. So we're training their brains to read the way our brain stores the information. So very cool findings that they're having with the science of reading. So a great way to help your student with Reading Horizons is that when they bring home these papers, have them explain the markings and explain why the vowel makes that sound. And just kind of have them walk you through the system that they're using in school. And if you have any more questions about anything that I talked about, feel free to email me. I'm also having many more videos that you can watch to go deeper into the science of reading. And I have book suggestions. I have some really great books that just really opened my eyes and my mind to how we read. It's very, very interesting. So thank you for listening, and I hope you learned a lot about the science of reading.